So thanks everybody for coming. I'm glad I didn't scare you off this morning. I guess that's a good sign. So we wanted to talk about water today and what's going on in this space. I think today's largely been focused in the energy sector, but things, I think as all of you have probably seen, are really starting to change, and water is becoming a bigger and bigger issue for a variety of reasons. We'll talk a little bit about that and what IHG is doing about it. So before I dive into IHG, let's talk about the water problem. You know, why is anyone paying attention to water all of a sudden? Well, we know there's some social issues at stake that are pretty critical. We've got a lot of people who are living without readily accessible drinking water, without proper sanitation. We've got some forecasting numbers that are pretty grim about water. And the big issue here is that, as we talked a little bit about this morning, unlike energy, there's not an alternative for water. We can't readily make it. We can't readily move it long distances. It becomes a really local issue. So when we think about water conservation and water stewardship, we really have to focus on where water matters most. I see PJ's head nodding from Coke, which means that I've got my lessons learned from the Coke team down right. So it's becoming more and more of a business imperative to start thinking about this, particularly when we start thinking about the role hotels play. I mentioned this earlier, but hotels are largely, at least for IHG, we are made up of small business owners. One of the great things about that is that means they are large pillars in their community. These are really critical business people in the local communities that they operate in. That also means that they have a real opportunity to both influence what's going on in the water space, but also a business imperative and a bit of a target if they don't do something proactive about it. So when we think about water, what does it mean for us as a business? Well, it makes up about 10% of our utility bills. Energy, as I mentioned earlier, is our number 2 line item on a P&L for a hotel. So first we have people, then we have energy. So that's why we focused on energy first. But water as 10%, that's not something to ignore. And we'll talk a little bit about how that's growing. But this is an emerging space for us. We are still learning. I think that's part of the reason why it hasn't been as an expensive driver in the past. But then we started looking at some of the other drivers that might make a business case for us to pay attention to water. Average water use per night in a hotel, 158 gallons. And when I first started selling this idea of focusing on water to our C-suite, we actually brought in, I didn't bring in 158 gallons, it would have taken up the whole room, but I brought in some big gallon containers and we showed them a visual of how many gallons that actually means per a night. It's a tremendous amount of water, literally getting flushed down the toilets of our hotels. 71% of water consumption in our hotels is happening in areas of moderate to severe water scarcity. So then you start to look at where that consumption is happening and water as a local issue, and you start seeing the business case really come together. What we have learned as well is that there's different drivers, and we'll talk a little bit about that. There's different risks at hand depending on the location of the property, and that changes our approach to it and the business case for it. So it's a bit different than the approach we've taken when it comes to energy.
So 10%, is that supply, is it wastewater, is it heating, is it conditioning, is it all of that?
Yeah, so when we pulled that one, that is supply and wastewater combined. So there are other drivers there, but it's the one we have for now. The nice thing in terms of the business case justification is that when you start including everything else, it will, of course, go up. And then finally, growth. Hospitality, like all businesses, we have, we want to grow. We have a return to shareholders that we need to provide. And our growth is largely in coastal and island destinations, as is most of travel and tourism. So you start putting all this together and you need to pay attention to water. So we talked a little bit about earlier the balance between the quantifiable and then the qualitative business case risks. And here, we don't have the whole dollar number. I don't have a green dollar sign on top of a happy face, knowing that this is a full digit number, but we know something is there. Okay, so before we talk about how we're meeting the challenge, let's talk a little bit about IHG, because I think that will help us understand why we've gone about it the way we have and where we're going. So we are one of the largest hotel companies globally. The brands that you may be familiar with, we have everything from the Holiday Inn Express, the whole Holiday Inn family, Crowne Plaza, InterContinental. We also have extended stay brands where people are really checking in and staying for longer periods of time. The hotel room is much more like an apartment. They're doing their own laundry. There's free laundry facilities for our guests to use on property. And then we've also purchased recently Kimpton properties. So we have boutique and lifestyle properties as part of our portfolio. So it really runs a huge range. It also means that what's unique about IHG as opposed to some of our competitors, because we have such different brands that meet different parts of the market, we have properties in very different locations. Holiday Inn was built as a property that you went to on road trips. So you have properties that are along the highway. Other properties only go in major, first-tier markets. So when you're thinking about water, you've really got a broad scope of locations to pay attention to. The other thing about us is, we are franchised, but when we look at our family of the employees it takes to run all of the IHG properties, we're looking at about 350,000 people. So if we can turn those into champions of environmental stewardship, you're looking at a pretty robust army if we can get them all galvanized around these issues. So we've got about 5,000 properties. I mentioned earlier we're largely franchised. We also only manage about 500 of our properties. So some of our competitors might have larger management roles to play, but we are really in a role of influencing. Most of our properties are franchised and owner-operated. We're not doing the management contracts. So then you're really in a teach, educate, and incentivize mode with our properties. The thing that's interesting is when you look at our estate, where we largely manage is in emerging markets, so Asia, Middle East, Africa, and China. So it allows us to have a bit more influence in some of the markets where water is most critical. Okay, so what are we doing about corporate responsibility? So for us, CR is about creating sustainable communities and better lives. And we do that through a variety of programs. IHG Green Engage is our online environmental stewardship program. We talked about it this morning a little bit, but it is our tool where we have all of our 5,000 plus properties. Utilize the tool, they log in, they load their data on a monthly basis across energy, water, and waste. And I'll show you a few shots of the tool later, but it allows us to benchmark our properties. It allows us to compare how they're doing month over month, this month compared to this month last year, benchmark properties, and then find out what solutions make the most sense for them and really help them down a sustainability journey. We also have a program called IHG Academy, and this is our workforce development program. When we were expanding into emerging markets, there's a lot of available talent in the market, but none had hospitality training. So this actually emerged from a business need. We found that we needed to take that staff, provide them with the tools and resources to learn how to be great champions in a hotel. And if we provided that workplace development, they would stay on with us, and we'd also have a lower turnover. So you'll start to see through all of our corporate responsibility initiatives, we're really trying to match up a business value with a local community or environmental impact to justify the program. IHG Foundation is our philanthropic arm that we have just launched. And then we also do a lot of work with public affairs and human rights. And human rights is really critical, just as a side note, and then I'll get back to the data side. But human rights for hospitality is a really critical place for us to play, both in terms of making sure that we're protecting the human rights of our employees, but also making sure that the guests that come through our properties are protected. And hospitality can be a place, an unintended bystander in some human rights violations. So we do a lot to train our employees on how to find it, how to identify it, and what to do about it. So all of these efforts go to these really key outcomes, and we measure them all around how do we make our owners more profitable. So when it comes to the environment, how do we reduce the bottom line so that owning and operating a box under one of our brands is a better business proposition than one of their competitors? How do we drive revenue share? So how do we use sustainability to really help get more heads in beds? And then reputation and value are really critically important. And employee engagement. And I think for a organization that is really focused, that has high turnover, these jobs are tough. Housekeeping is a tough gig. If we can find a way to really connect our teams with the work that they're doing for that value and that mission-driven business, we see a real engagement opportunity. All right, so what are we doing about carbon and water? So carbon, we talked about this morning. We have a goal to reduce by 12% by 2017. Water, we have the same goal, but we have taken a nuanced approach there. We want to reduce by 12%, but in water-stressed areas, so that we are focusing our efforts around water where they have the most impact. If we have a drought in California and we are reducing water in London, we have not solved the water challenge. So while we use Green Engage to have all of our hotels use best practice and pursue water conservation, we really want to focus on where water is going to matter most. So the first way we do that is through Green Engage, which I've talked about. And this tool we've had around for a couple of years. We continue to help evolve, keep it state of the art. We do a lot of usability testing with our GMs. But interestingly, I think I have one of the only tools that we don't want to be very sticky. We want our staff to get into the tool, find the information they want, and leave, and get back to the business of running their hotels and implementing the solutions. So we have a really interesting challenge here when it comes to data and engagement with a data tool that we don't want them to spend 45 minutes playing around. We want them to find exactly what they need, give us their inputs, and then go back to the property so they can do the work that's going to have some impact. But each hotel, this is our Crown Plaza Midtown just down the street, each hotel logs in, and what they see is a couple key pieces of information. They see how they're performing against their annual targets and goals. They see how they're doing against what we call the IHG Green Engage standard. So that's our requirement that they enter their monthly utility data and that they complete 10 getting started green solutions. So that we track that and we follow up in terms of quality control and make sure that they're completing those things. And then what it does if they scroll further down is it helps them identify solutions. So if they are behind the benchmark for water compared to comparable hotels, it helps with suggestions of which water solutions in the tool might make sense for them. If they're behind on waste, which waste tools might make sense for them. And so as they go through, they can use the reports to show their owners and operators how they're doing. They can use green solutions, and each one gives them a step-by-step guide for implementation. So how do you what light bulbs should you source? How do you go about procuring them? How do you go through all of the implementation? So the tool's been really a great resource for us to both know how we're doing, but also to help us guide the hotels through their sustainability journey. The thing that's really changed for us recently has been, in terms of the business case, has been our customers. So we know that about 75% of our individual guests care about a green stay. They will tell us, I'd like to stay in a sustainable hotel. What that means for each of you might be very different. So we don't know exactly what that means yet, but we know that there is something there in terms of a business driver. Further, we know from our corporate accounts, they have really switched in just the last 3 years. We used to get questions in our RFPs. So when our corporate accounts come to us and say, we'd like to find out how much it's going to cost for our employees to stay in your hotels. We'd like to know how close they are to airports. We'd like to know about the meeting space. And we'd also like to know about sustainability. Are you green or not? That was the extent of the question. So understandably, every hotel in the business said, sure, yes, I'm green. So it wasn't really a place for differentiation. Our accounts have really changed their tunes. So the questions we now get are, what's the water footprint of a night stay? What's the carbon footprint? What's your landfill diversion? And interestingly, about 80% of the accounts in the market use the same model RFP. So we're getting the same questions over and over again in the same model. What's great about Green Engage is this has enabled us to auto-feed these answers into all of our RFPs. So when our hotels are focused on trying to win business, this information is already populated for them as long as they're compliant with the standard. It's a great business driver for us and allows them to go after the other parts of the RFP that they really need to focus on. What we have seen is that on average, we usually win around 30 to 40% of RFPs. It's pretty average. When we're able to answer the sustainability questions, that number goes above 70%. So while that's not necessarily causal, there's probably other great things going on a property that's got a great sustainability story, you're absolutely starting to see a correlation between sustainability driving revenue. The other way we're bringing this to life is for that individual guest. So when we know that 70% of guests want a green stay, how do we help our guests find out about all of IHG's brands? We have taken the approach to not have a green brand. We believe that this sustainability is so important to what we're doing as a business that all of our properties need to engage with Green Engage, and they all need to be part of these global targets. So we're not going to have a sustainability brand where you walk in and everything is bamboo. That's not the approach that we're taking. So then how do we bring this to life? So on our individual booking pages, we're starting to share information about Green Engage on that particular property, so that when a guest is booking, you can find out what's going on with that particular hotel, where they rank in terms of certification with Green Engage. Our next evolution will be, how do we bring to life some of the key attributes that are happening on that property? How do we bring those alive for a guest? Some guests are very interested. You're probably a great target audience who would be really curious about what's happening behind the walls of a property in terms of sustainability. Other guests want to check in through their phone, not even talk to a front desk, go to their room, order room service, and never see somebody again. So we have to really figure out the balance between bringing sustainability to life for our whole audience. All right, so back to water. So what does this all mean? We've gone down this sustainability journey. We've started doing some of these best practice things. We're driving efficiency through Green Engage. But as I mentioned, we're learning that water is a lot more than just about efficiency on property. And as part of the local community, we've got to figure out what's our role here as a business, and sometimes a very large business in the local community when it comes to water. So since we're not the experts in this space, we have partnered with the Water Footprint Network to really help provide that expertise. And what we've recently, just 2 weeks ago at World Water Week in Stockholm, we announced that we have now done a full risk assessment of all of the water risks related to every single one of our current properties and all of our pipeline hotels. So what this means is that we've now mapped whether it is a reputation risk, whether it is a regulatory risk, whether it is quality, whether it's quantity. We've mapped all the available risks related to water for every single one of our hotels, so that now we can figure out what do we actually do in each of these local operations to go after not only where water stress is high, but the right kind of activity to meet the challenges of that particular market. This will help us really build the business case for each one of those hotels around why they're engaging in water. When they might scratch their head and say, 10% of utility bills doesn't sound so high for me. Maybe I need to focus on something else. And this will really help us map out the why and the how of how to engage on water sustainability. There we go. So one of the reasons we did this is one of our first pieces of analysis was that when we wanted to look at 12% water reduction in water-stressed areas, and how do we decide what's a water-stressed area? We were just getting started down this road. We looked at blue water scarcity. So blue water scarcity is the measurement of how much water is taken out of that particular ecosystem above what that ecosystem can provide to maintain normal environmental levels. So if you are 200% above, it means you're taking out 200% more water than what that local watershed should have removed if it wants to stay safe and stable. So we did blue water scarcity as our first approach to this. And we found that about 30% of our hotels were in blue water scarce areas. So that was a real light bulb moment for us, that this is just one piece of what Water Footprint Network has been able to model for us. And we already had a pretty large imperative. If we start degrading the ecosystem around our properties, we are also degrading our business. People travel to locations that they're excited about. I like going to Le Grand in Paris because it's a beautiful hotel, but it's also a beautiful location. The surrounding community is part of a business driver for us, and we need to be able to protect it. So this is just one of the many factors that we have now mapped for our properties. So Water Footprint Network is helping us identify what do we do property by property to really go after water stewardship. But there's a couple of things where we've had some lessons learned and some case studies along the way to kind of test and learn what works for us. So one of the things we did is California, I'm sure we're all familiar, has been facing record droughts. And our properties out there started shouting very early, what do we do about this? What more do we do besides Green Engage? How can you help us get ahead of the water issue here? So we sent what we called water conservation toolkits to each of our 230 properties in California. It provided them information, how do you better utilize Green Engage, what's going on in the regulatory environment that you need to be prepared to happen. And then one of the interesting things that we did for the first time was we partnered with one of our suppliers. So we had them map out where are the rebates in California? What can we help put in our hotels at little or no cost? How do we get some of these water-saving technologies on the ground quickly? So they helped us provide those opportunities for the properties. What we also did was we talked a little bit about the business model. A lot of our properties don't have a chief engineer. They don't have somebody to help drive a lot of this work. They might have a very smart handyman or woman, but this is a bit out of scope for them. So we partnered with the California Conservation Corps, who came in and provided the labor. They trained their people in how to do bathroom retrofits and provided all the labor. So we got free labor, we got reduced or no cost on bathroom fixtures, and we were able to do retrofits across 6 of our properties, did full bathroom retrofits in response to the water challenge. That saved us about 2.4 million gallons of water, and it's really just the beginning. We've seen a lot of the properties do a more piecemeal approach in response. So this has been one effort. What does this actually look like on property? Well, InterContinental San Francisco, this is actually a LEED certified property. So they have seen an estimated 2 million gallons of water saved a year now through low flow faucets, toilets, and back of house water restrictions. They're doing some HVAC cooling water treatment systems, and they're looking to install waterless urinals in all the restrooms, which would be another 500,000 gallons of water saved a year. So it really comes to life pretty quickly and starts adding up to real numbers. Holiday and Diamond Bar, this was our very first property. So they're the ones that tested the California Conservation Corps with us. They saw 16% reduction in water use, which is about $2,000 a year in associated costs. Another great property, full bathroom retrofits. So things that we wouldn't have been able to afford or provide in a franchise model otherwise. Where has this gotten us? Well, this is our obligatory brag slide. So, you know, take a picture, smile. This is the one we had to put in. But what we are excited about is that hospitality is not been the leader when it comes to sustainability. We've been a slower mover in terms of the industry. What we're excited about is that the work like this is really starting to change the game for us. It's starting to highlight that we are a player that not only needs to pay attention, but where we can take leadership. So it started influencing our brand. It's definitely shown up in our CDP rankings. Project Icarus is a gold medal that's awarded from the customer side. So all of the large B2B customers get together, and that's from their organization. So we're excited to see that this is actually taking shape and starting to drive sustainability in the right way. So what does the future hold for us? Well, you know, there's a couple of things I think here. For those that are familiar, the Millennium Goals sunset in 2015, and we saw a lot of progress in response to water. You know, the United Nations Declaration really started shining a light on the issue of water stewardship for many businesses, for governments, for NGOs, and really started bringing everybody together. But now we're facing new goals. So now we've got the Sustainable Development Goals, which are, again, focusing on water. Water is now listed as a human right. So there are many things happening, I think, in the water space that are starting to pull business together. So it's no longer just about whether or not there's a cost associated with it, but that real license to operate when it comes to water stewardship. All right, so how can we help? One of the great programs that we're piloting is called Make a Greener Stay. So this is before you all have a headache from your eye rolling so hard when we talk about towel and linen reuse program in hospitality. That's always the number one question. And everybody is always annoyed about it because you're either annoyed that somebody asked you to reuse your towel and you feel like at $350 a night you should get as many free clean towels as you want, or you're annoyed with me because you hung up your towel and housekeeping changed it out, and here you were trying to be a good steward in the environment and it didn't work out for you. So no one's ever happy with the towel linen reuse program. So we are taking a different approach to that and trying to find the right balance. What we're doing now is we're offering Rewards Club points, so an incentive for giving up housekeeping entirely. And what this does for us is it allows us to actually have a return on investment that we didn't have because we can manage the rooms differently. Housekeeping doesn't even set foot in your room. It also means you get exactly what you asked for. We don't have housekeepers trying to guess, oh, that towel looks kind of hung on the door but not on the hook. I don't know if that's what it's, you know, I don't know how to behave. And this was a real challenge. You know, housekeepers are measured on guest satisfaction, and more guests are going to be happy with a cleaner room than not. So when their job is on the line and their rankings are on the line, they're walking into, you know, 20 rooms a day trying to clean them in 10 minutes or less. they're gonna try and do it the same way every single time. So that training proposition was a real challenge. If we take that piece out, we actually can provide some water savings, we can provide some guest satisfaction so you get what you want, and we can provide you with an incentive for it so that you're getting a little something back. So we've launched Make a Greener Stay with our Holiday Inn Express and our Holiday Inn brands here in the US. It's going very well, so we're going to test the uptake of it across Europe next, and the rest of our brands here in the US. So participate if you wish. The next piece, and this is one that we like to share, a partner of ours, Chattahoochee Riverkeeper, is just a local organization. I know a lot of folks are local here. You know, before the Atlanta drought, we never saw rain barrels. That wasn't, I don't think it was even in our vocabulary. Now, not only do you see rain barrels at homes throughout the neighborhood, painted by people's kids, you can buy them at Whole Foods. There's just a tremendous opportunity to both connect with the local community, but also provide a place that you can do something at home to really harvest rainwater and save a little bit of our precious resource. And then the next one about what you can do, I kind of laugh about this slide because it's all the things like turn off the tap when you're brushing your teeth, and don't take your car to the car wash, and fix your leaks. But I think it's important. So when we look at the water use in our properties, 30% of the water used in our properties is from our guest rooms. So despite any low flow fixtures that we have, despite any information about the environmental stewardship, so we know you're not turning off your water when you're brushing your teeth when you go into a hotel room. So we're guessing you also aren't doing it at home. So a lot of these best practices that we see in hospitality can certainly be applied to us throughout our daily lives. Interestingly, when we think about low flow fixtures, I think hospitality is going to have to take a lesson from the Kraft mac and cheese commercial. I don't know if anybody has seen it recently. Kraft mac and cheese has recently come out with sort of a gotcha commercial. They're saying, we changed all of the ingredients in our products to be natural, and we did it about a year ago, and none of you noticed. You assumed it was still kind of a bad for you product, but that your family and your kids loved it, and so you continued eating it quite happily. And actually, it's much better for you, and we didn't say a word about it because we were scared we were going to lose you as customers, but we've done you a favor. You're welcome. And they're very clever commercials. And that's how I think we need to approach low-flow shower heads. We have gone through a change at IHG. The brand standard has now moved to a low-flow shower head. But we haven't said one word about it because there was so much concern that people would just assume that shampoo was in their hair, even if it wasn't. That you would assume you were kind of cold in the shower, even though you had plenty of hot water. So there's a lot of new technology available that's providing great savings, but also that customer experience that is still just as good, if not better, than it was before. So with that, I will pause, see if we've got any questions. Yeah, I think there's a mic.
I just had a question around, I guess, behavior, and maybe it goes to the towels. I think it goes bigger than that, though, but what we sort of jokingly deem, hotel behavior. So if you're at your own house, you don't leave the TV running, or I would suspect most people don't. You don't crank the air conditioner down to 62 degrees. You don't do a lot of things, but, I was thinking, we had a colleague the other day that called it hotel cold. They wanted their room hotel cold. And so how do
Which is 40 in the summer, just for definition.
Yeah, whatever makes it not kick off at night. And so I guess, what do you do to drive that behavior on sort of a bigger picture where people, other than getting points for not having your room clean, is there some other bigger way to drive behavior where people don't treat hotels, resources like they have no end?
Yeah. If you have an answer to your own question, I will take it because we are still learning. So in all seriousness, this is, I think, one of the reasons hospitality is a little bit later to the game in terms of sustainability than some other industries. Because our guests haven't demanded it, because they've actually wanted the opposite. You come into a hotel and you feel like for some reason you have paid for all of these resources regardless of what the actual impacts might be, or your own personal values. You kind of check your values at the door and say, this is just for this one night, and you don't add up all the one-night stays that are having an impact. So there's a couple of ways that we are doing it. Some on the energy side are much easier to do. Most hotels have thermostat deadbands, and you can push it down as cold as you want, and it'll even tell you that it's trying to get to 40, but it stopped long ago at 68. So some of them are technology opportunities. The shower heads, we've seen great water savings, and nobody has known. The challenge I think we have is how do we capitalize on this 75% of guests wanting a sustainable stay, balanced with the behavior that we're seeing that what guests really want is not so sustainable, and how do we bring that together either through education, through awareness within the room, or through some other means. And we're testing a lot of things, whether it's make a greener stay, whether it's information in your bathroom. So when you look in the mirror, there's a giant sticker there that tells you something about what's happening with the soap or what's happening with the water, through pre-stay emails. I mean, we're really, it's a scattershot approach to see what sticks, because we are still learning what the guest wants from us in terms of information. We do know no one wants to read a CR report when you have gotten off an overnight flight, checked into your hotel, and really just want to be left alone. So we won't do that one. Any other questions? Yeah.
So nice work on water, risks worldwide. I think that's a great approach. Would you elaborate on blue water and kind of maybe educate us on, because I don't know that everybody's familiar with the water footprinting and the difference between blue and gray and green.
Oh, sure. So when we look at water, it is a coloring box of labels when it comes to water. So when we look at blue water, we are talking about the clean water in the ecosystem that is, being used by natural purposes. When we've also talking about gray water, we're talking about more water recycling, water that has already been used for something else and that we are trying to clean out or repurpose for other uses. So you might see some properties doing gray water reuse to then refill toilets, for example. The reason we started with blue water scarcity is if you actually think about travel and tourism, not only is it the most logical one, just because when we think about in general water use, we think about like the water in the ecosystem quite quickly, and whether or not there's enough water for fish, and whether or not there's enough drinking water, and whether or not there's enough access to clean water for people and for creatures and plants. But when you think about travel and tourism, that's what supports that being a good destination to go to. So that's why it made the most sense to start with a blue water scarcity index to understand our risks, eye-opening moment, and then we looked at the rest of the risks, which have only further instilled that we need to be proactive about water. Does that help? Lame 30-second version of Water 101.
I love the fact that you have this thing where you give people rewards for not having housekeeping on in the room. Actually, for years I've been putting the do not disturb sign out on my room, and sometimes it works, but other times I'll end up leaving like a whole basket of like towels and stuff outside my room. I don't know if that's defeating the purpose. When you're responding to these RFPs from companies, are you able to respond on a individual property basis with actual data from each property?
Yep. So each property fills out their own the same way. So if you're a travel buyer, you want to know how much is it going to cost to stay at a Holiday Inn in Houston versus the InterContinental in Atlanta for all the travel purposes. We are also going to give you not only that price point, but the carbon footprint of each of your guest nights, the water footprint, along with what kind of meeting space in case you're also trying to procure. So it's really giving a holistic picture of the full property on a property by property level.
And is that something that you can provide that a lot of your competitors can't provide?
Yeah, it's one of the benefits of Green Engage. So a lot of our competitors have similar tools to track, to do property management, to track EMS, but they are not integrated throughout their business in the way that we've integrated this one for now. We hope to stay that way.